Good morning, I'm Stephen Leake, an elder at First Presbyterian Church in Mesquite, Texas, and I'm also the Sunday school teacher of the Discipleship Sunday School class. And we're continuing our study of the book of John with the introduction, and this is the fourth part of the introduction. We've seen that the aim of the writer of the fourth gospel was to present the Christian faith in such a way that it would commend itself to the Greek world, and also to combat the heresies and mistaken ideas which had arisen within the church. And now we go on to ask, who was that writer who was concerned about those things? Tradition answers unanimously that the author was John the Apostle. We shall see that the authority of John lies beyond the gospel, although its actual form and style of writing did not come from his hand. Let us then assemble what we know about him. He was the younger son of Zebedee, who possessed a fishing boat in the Sea of Galilee and was sufficiently well off to be able to employ hired servants to help him with his work. And that comes to us from the book of Mark. His mother was Salome, and it seems likely that she was the sister of Mary, the mother of Jesus, again from Matthew and Mark. With the help of his brother James, he obeyed the call of Jesus, also from the first chapter of Mark. It would seem that James and John were in partnership with Peter in the fishing trade, and Luke tells us this. He was one of the inner circle of disciples, for the list of disciples always begin with the names Peter, James, and John. And there were certain great occasions when Jesus took these specially and specifically with him. And Mark notes 3 or 4. In character, he was clearly a turbulent and ambitious man. Jesus gave to him and his brother the name Boanerges, which the gospel writers back then took to mean sons of thunder. John and his brother James were completely exclusive and intolerant. And if you go to one of these stories here, I had a hard time figuring out what exclusive meant. But John went to Jesus and he was upset because someone else was casting out demons in the name of Jesus. And John objected to that. And Jesus told him not to be because the man was doing good works. But John and his brother, that's what that means when Professor Barclay called them exclusive. So violent was their temper that they were prepared to blast the Samaritan village out of existence, because it would not give them hospitality when they were on their journey to Jerusalem. And Luke tells us that story. Either they or their mother Salome had the ambition that when Jesus came into his kingdom, they might be his principal ministers of state. Mark and Matthew relate that story. In the other 3 Gospels, John appears as a leader of the apostolic band, one of the inner circle, and yet a turbulent, ambitious, and intolerant character. In the book of Acts, John always appears as the companion of Peter, and he never himself speaks. His name is still one of the 3 names at the head of the apostolic list. He's with Peter when a lame man is healed at the beautiful gate of the temple. With Peter, he's brought before the Sanhedrin and faces the Jewish leaders with a courage and a boldness that astonishes them. With Peter, he goes from Jerusalem to Samaria to survey the work done by Philip. But in Paul's letters, he appears only once. In Galatians 2:9, he's named as one of the pillars of the church, along with Peter and James, and along with them is depicted as giving his approval to the work of Paul. John was a strange mixture. He was one of the leaders of the 12. He was one of the inner circle of Jesus' closest friends. At the same time, he was a man of temper and ambition and intolerance, and yet of courage. We may follow John into the stories told of him in the early church. Now, the story that I'm going to tell you next comes from secular writing, not from sacred writing. Eusebius tells us that he was banished to Patmos in the reign of Domitian. In the same passage, Eusebius tells a characteristic story about John, a story which he received from Clement of Alexandria. John became a kind of bishop of Asia Minor and was visiting one of his churches near Ephesus. In the congregation, he saw a tall and exceptionally fine-looking young man. He turned to the elder in charge of the congregation and said to him, "I commit that young man into your charge and into your care, and I call this congregation to witness that I do so." The elder took the young man into his own house and cared for him and instructed him. And the day came when he was baptized and received into the church. But very soon afterwards, he fell in with evil friends and embarked on a career of crime. He ended up becoming the leader of a band murdering and pillaging brigands. Sometime afterwards, John returned to the congregation. He said to the elder, "Restore to me the trust which I and the Lord committed to you and to the church of which you were in charge." At first, the elder didn't understand of what John was speaking. "I mean," said John, "that I'm asking you for the soul of the young man whom I entrusted to you." "Alas," said the elder, "he is dead." "Dead?" asked John. "He's dead to God," said the elder. "He fell from grace. He was forced to flee from the city for his crimes, and now he is abandoned in the mountains." Immediately John went to the mountains. Deliberately he allowed himself to be captured by the robber band. They brought him before the young man, who was now the chief of the band, and in his shame the young man tried to run away from John. John, though an old man, pursued him. "My son," he cried, "are you running away from your father? I am feeble and far advanced in age. Have pity on me, my son. Fear not. There is yet hope of salvation for you." John continued, "I will stand for you before the Lord Christ. If need be, I will gladly die for you as he died for me. Stop, stay, believe. It is Christ who has sent me to you." The appeal broke the heart of the young man. He stopped, threw away his weapons, and wept. Together he and John came down the mountainside, and he was brought back into the church and into the Christian way. So there we see the love and courage of John still in operation as an older man. It's the great biblical scholar Jerome who tells the story of the last words of John. When he was dying, his disciples asked him if he had any last message to leave them. "Little children," he said, "love one another." Again and again he repeated it, and they asked him if that was all he had to say. Like Jacob, he said, "It is enough. It is enough, for it is the Lord's command." In other words, he had heard that quote from Christ himself. Such then is our information about John, and he emerges as a figure of fiery temper, of wide ambition, of undoubted courage, and, in the end, of gentle love. If we've been following our references closely, we've noticed one thing. All of our information about John comes from the first three Gospels. All of those references I gave you in the first part of the lesson, none of them came from the fourth Gospel. They were all from the Synoptic Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's astonishing that the fourth gospel never mentions the Apostle John from beginning to end. But it does mention two other people. First, it speaks of the disciple whom Jesus loved. There are 4 mentions of him. He was leaning on Jesus' breast at the Last Supper. Jesus committed Mary into his care as he died upon the cross. Mary Magdalene met him and Peter on her return from the empty tomb on that first Easter morning. And he was present at the last resurrection appearance of Jesus by the lakeside. Second, the fourth gospel has a kind of a character whom we might call the witness. As the fourth gospel tells of the spear thrust into the side of Jesus and the issue of the water and the blood, there comes this comment: "He who saw this has testified so that you may also believe." His testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth. At the end of the gospel comes the statement that it was the beloved disciple who testified of these things, and we know that his testimony is true. Here we are faced with a rather strange thing. In the fourth gospel, John is never mentioned, but a beloved disciple is, and in addition, there is a witness of some kind to the whole story. It's never been really doubted in tradition that the beloved disciple was in fact John. A few have tried to identify him with Lazarus, for Jesus is said to have loved Lazarus, or with the rich young ruler, of which it is said that Jesus, looking on him, loved him. But although the gospel never says so in so many words, tradition has always identified the beloved disciple with John, and there is no real need to doubt the identification. But a very real point arises. Suppose John himself actually did the writing of the gospel. Would he really be likely to speak of himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved? Would he really be likely to pick himself out like this, and as if we're to say, I was his favorite. He loved me best of all. It's surely very unlikely that John would confer such a title on himself. If it was conferred by others, it's a lovely title. If it was conferred by himself, it comes perilously near to an almost incredible self-conceit. Is there any way then that the gospel can be John's own eyewitness story and yet at the same time have been actually written down by someone else? Next week, we'll talk about that. We'll discuss how the Gospel of John came to be written. Thank you very much, and God bless.